Marcus Johnson adjusted his graduation cap one last time before stepping onto the stage. At 18, he had just finished high school with top honors, and his future looked bright. As the principal called his name, Marcus glanced at the audience where his father, Darius Johnson, CEO of Johnson Enterprises, sat straight-backed and proud. Next to him was Grandma Clara, wiping tears from her eyes. "That's my grandson," Clara called out, ignoring the formal setting. A few people chuckled, but Marcus only smiled. His grandmother had raised his father alone and had been the foundation of their family through thick and thin. Later, at home in their Chicago mansion, Darius raised a glass. "To Marcus. Harvard Business School awaits you in the fall. You've made me proud, son." Marcus nodded, but inside he felt a familiar pressure. Being the son of Darius Johnson meant expectations were sky-high. His father had built Johnson Enterprises from nothing, fighting racial barriers every step of the way to become one of America's most respected black businessmen. The company now employed thousands and was worth billions. "Dad, I want to earn my place," Marcus said. "I don't want people thinking I'm just riding your coattails." Darius set down his glass. "I understand that better than you know. Which is why I have a proposal for you." Marcus listened as his father explained that he needed to travel overseas for 3 weeks to close an international deal. "It's crucial for the company's expansion into Europe. While I'm gone, how would you like to take on a summer internship? Get your feet wet before college." Marcus straightened up. "Really? You mean it?" "I do. And there's more. I want you to prepare a presentation on digital innovation for the board meeting next week. Show them your ideas before I leave." Clara watched the exchange with a knowing smile. "Just like your father at your age. Always eager to prove himself." That night, Marcus stayed up late in his room, surrounded by notes and his laptop. This was his chance to show everyone at Johnson Enterprises that he was more than just the boss's son. He researched, planned, and practiced his presentation until he could deliver it perfectly. Over the next few days, Marcus visited the company headquarters, a gleaming skyscraper in downtown Chicago. Employees smiled respectfully as he passed, but he always wondered what they really thought. Did they see him as Darius Johnson's son, or as Marcus, his own person? He met with department heads who explained their work, though he noticed some seemed to simplify things too much, as if he couldn't understand complex business concepts. Only Richard Whitman, his father's vice president of operations, seemed to treat him with something approaching normalcy, asking tough questions that challenged Marcus. "Your father relies on me to run things when he's away," Richard explained during their meeting. "Been doing it for 15 years now. Started from the bottom, just like him." There was something in his tone that Marcus couldn't quite place, but he appreciated not being talked down to. The night before his presentation, Marcus rehearsed one final time for Grandma Clara. "You remind me so much of your grandfather," she said softly when he finished. "He never got to see what Darius built, but he would be so proud of both of you." "I'm nervous, Grandma. What if they don't take me seriously?" Clara took his hands in hers. "You are a Johnson. Stand tall and speak your truth. The rest will follow." The morning of the presentation, Marcus dressed carefully in his best suit. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, he thought about his father's journey, the barriers he had broken, and the legacy he was building. Now it was Marcus's turn to add to that legacy, to prove himself worthy of the Johnson name not because of blood, but because of merit. "I can do this," he whispered to himself. "This is my chance." Little did he know that this presentation wouldn't just be a simple business meeting. It would be the beginning of a journey that would test everything he thought he knew about his father's company, the people around him, and ultimately, himself. Everyone gets faced with living up to other people's expectations at some point. Share in the comments which state you're watching this inspiring story from, and don't forget to share it with someone who needs to hear this message today. The Johnson Enterprises conference room buzzed with activity as board members and senior executives filed in. Marcus stood at the front, adjusting his presentation slides one last time. His heart pounded, but he remembered his grandmother's words, "Stand tall and speak your truth." As the room filled, Marcus recognized faces he'd known since childhood, people who had attended his birthday parties and graduation. Janet Miller, the CFO, gave him an encouraging smile. Others nodded politely. Richard Whitman entered last, taking a seat directly across from the podium. "Let's begin," announced Barbara Chen, the board chairwoman. Marcus Johnson will present his ideas on digital innovation strategies. Taking a deep breath, Marcus launched into his carefully prepared presentation. He outlined a comprehensive plan to modernize the company's digital platforms, backed by market research and competitive analysis he'd conducted himself. 5 minutes in, he was hitting his stride, confidence building with each slide. The executives seemed engaged, some even nodding along until Richard Whitman cleared his throat loudly. "Excuse me," Richard interrupted, his voice cutting through the room. "May I ask a question?" Before Marcus could respond, Richard stood up. "Is this the best that the Prince Heir can offer?" His voice dripped with contempt, a mocking smile spreading across his face. "These are childish ideas from someone who's never worked a day in his life." The room fell silent. Marcus froze, his prepared notes suddenly feeling inadequate in his hands. "This is what happens when we prioritize diversity over merit," Richard continued, emphasizing the word diversity with a sneer. Marcus noticed someone in the back row discreetly pointing a phone toward him, recording. His stomach dropped. "Perhaps we should review our internship policies to ensure we have qualified candidates. Not just those with the right last name or the right color." Marcus struggled to maintain his composure, but words failed him. A few executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up. Others averted their eyes, while some barely concealed their smirks. "I think we've heard enough," Richard said, practically shooing Marcus away from the podium. "Let's move on to actual business matters." Humiliation burning through every inch of his body, Marcus gathered his materials with trembling hands. The walk from the podium to the door felt like miles, each step echoing in the silent room. Just as he reached the door, he heard the first chuckle, followed by another. By the time he closed the door behind him, full laughter had erupted. In the hallway, Marcus leaned against the wall, fighting back tears. Sarah, his father's assistant, approached with concern. "Marcus, are you okay?" He couldn't answer. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Opening it, he found a company chat group notification. Someone had already shared the video of his humiliation, with comments flowing in, "Daddy's boy got schooled. Guess the apple falls far from the tree. This is what happens when you hire based on color not competence." Each comment stabbed deeper than the last. He tried calling his father, but the call went straight to voicemail. Darius was likely in meetings halfway across the world, unreachable when Marcus needed him most. By evening, the video had spread throughout the company's internal channels. Marcus sat alone in his car in the parking garage, scrolling through countless cruel comments. From people he thought respected him, or at least respected his father enough to treat his son with basic decency. The worst part wasn't just the public humiliation. It was the realization that beneath the polite smiles and respectful nods, many people at his father's company harbored these views. How long had they felt this way? Did his father know? Driving home, Marcus felt his world crumbling around him. Everything he thought he knew about his place in the world, about his father's company, about his future, all of it suddenly seemed built on shifting sand. When he finally pulled into their driveway, it was dark. He sat in the car, unable to move, unable to face his grandmother with this shame. The phone in his hand buzzed again with more notifications, more people viewing the video, more comments tearing him apart. This wasn't just a bad presentation or a tough business lesson. This was a cruel awakening to a reality he wasn't prepared to face, a call to an adventure he never wanted to embark on. Marcus finally dragged himself from the car and entered the house through the side door, hoping to avoid his grandmother. All he wanted was to hide in his room and forget this day had ever happened. But as he crept up the stairs, Clara's voice called out from the living room. "Marcus? Is that you, honey? How did your presentation go?" He froze, hand gripping the banister. The pride in her voice made everything worse. "Fine, Grandma. I'm just tired. Going to bed early. Without dinner. I made your favorite dash, I'm not hungry," he cut her off, continuing up the stairs before she could ask more questions. In his room, Marcus locked the door and slumped against it. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. More notifications, more people viewing the video. He turned it off and threw it onto his bed. His eyes fell on the wall opposite his desk covered with his achievements, awards, and pictures with his father at company events. Next to his desk sat stacks of notebooks filled with business ideas he'd been developing for years, and the leather portfolio his father had given him when he got accepted to Harvard. In a sudden rush of anger, Marcus grabbed the notebooks and hurled them across the room. Pages scattered everywhere, years of work and dreams spread across the floor. He tore down the certificates and photos, ripping some in the process. Then he grabbed the expensive fountain pen his father had given him for graduation and snapped it in half. "It was all a lie," he muttered, tears finally breaking free. "All of it." A soft knock on the door interrupted his destruction. "Marcus?" Clara's voice was gentle but firm. "Open this door, young man." "I'm fine, Grandma. Please, just leave me alone. I've raised a son and helped raise you." "I know, fine, when I hear it, and that ain't it." Her voice softened. "Please, baby." Marcus reluctantly opened the door. Clara took one look at the destruction and at her grandson's tear-streaked face, and without a word, she pulled him into her arms. Despite being a foot shorter than him, in that moment she seemed to hold the whole world together. "They humiliated me, Grandma," Marcus finally said, his voice breaking. "Richard Whitman, he made me look like a fool in front of everyone. Said I was only there because of Dad and because I'm black." Clara guided him to sit on the edge of the bed. As Marcus showed her the video on his phone, her expression hardened, but she remained silent until it finished. "And Dad's not answering his phone," Marcus continued. "Not that it would matter. They're all going to see me as the diversity hire, the affirmative action kid, the dash, that's enough," Clara said sharply, then took a deep breath. Marcus noticed her hand go briefly to her chest, a gesture he'd seen more frequently lately. "I won't have you repeating their poison." She reached into her pocket for a small pill bottle, discreetly taking a tablet without water while Marcus was looking down. "I'm not going back there," Marcus declared, gesturing at the scattered notebooks. "I'm dropping the internship. Maybe I'll defer Harvard, take a gap year. I don't even know if I want to go into business anymore." "Is that what you think a Johnson does? Run away when things get hard?" "This isn't about being strong, Grandma. They don't respect me. They never will." Clara's eyes flashed. "You think I don't know about disrespect? You think your father never faced worse than what you showed me?" Marcus fell silent. His grandmother rarely spoke about the past or the struggles she and his father had faced. "I shouldn't have to deal with this in 2025, Marcus finally said. "Dad built that company. I'm his son. They should at least should. There's no should in this world for people like us," Clara interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "There's only what is and what we do about it." She bent down slowly, too slowly, Marcus noticed with concern, and picked up one of his torn notebooks. "You can run today and give them exactly what they want," she said, placing the notebook in his hands. "Or you can do what Johnsons have always done, turn poison into medicine." Marcus stared at the notebook, at years of dreams and ideas now scattered and torn, just like his confidence. Part of him wanted to throw it all away and never look back. But something in his grandmother's steady gaze held him in place, forcing him to confront a choice he wasn't ready to make. The world he thought he knew had shattered. Did he have what it took to face the real one that lay beyond the broken pieces? The next morning, Marcus found his grandmother in the sunroom, a worn cardboard box beside her chair that he'd never seen before. "Sit down," Clara said, patting the chair next to her. "There are things you need to know." Marcus obeyed, still feeling hollow from yesterday's humiliation. Clara opened the box and pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local School Board Rejects Negro Teacher Despite Qualifications." "That's you," Marcus realized, looking at the grainy photo of a much younger Clara standing proudly despite the headline. 1963, she nodded. "I had my teaching degree from Howard University. Top of my class. The white schools wouldn't hire me, and the black schools in our district were already fully staffed. I interviewed at 6 different schools before one finally hired me." She pulled out more clippings, photographs, and letters, spreading them across the table. "This is from when they tried to fire me for teaching black history. This one's from when I helped organize the teachers to demand equal pay. And this." She paused, handling a particular photo carefully. "This is your grandfather at the March on Washington. I was there too, 8 months pregnant with your father." Marcus had never seen most of these photos or heard these stories. "Why haven't you told me about this before?" Clara sighed. "Your father wanted to protect you from some of the ugliness we faced. He wanted you to grow up feeling you could achieve anything without the shadow of doubt." She looked at Marcus intently. "But perhaps we protected you too much." She pulled out another photo, a young Darius in his first office, hardly more than a closet with a desk. "Your father's first loan application was rejected 17 times before someone took a chance on him. At his first major business presentation, a man stood up and asked why they should listen to a proposal from, and I quote, the help." Marcus winced. How did Dad handle it? He sent that man a thank you note the next day, along with the business cards of 3 major clients he'd signed specifically because of how he handled that moment with dignity. Clara smiled at the memory. 2 years later, that same man came asking for a job. She gathered the items back into the box, then suddenly pressed her hand to her chest, taking a shallow breath. "Grandma?" Marcus asked, alarmed. "Are you okay?" "Just getting old, baby," she said, waving off his concern while discreetly reaching for her pill bottle. "My point is, what happened to you yesterday was terrible, but it wasn't unique. It wasn't even the worst that's happened in this family." "But it's 2025, Marcus protested. "Things are supposed to be different now. Some things change, some don't. The packaging gets prettier, but the poison inside stays the same." She swallowed her pill when Marcus glanced away. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Marcus stared out the window. "I don't know if I can face them again." "Of course you can. You're a Johnson." "But that's not what I'm asking." Clara leaned forward. "What are you going to do about it?" For the first time since yesterday, Marcus felt something other than shame and humiliation. A spark of something hotter, more purposeful. "If I go back, they'll just laugh at me again." "Maybe," Clara agreed. "What's that saying your father has? They can laugh while they sign the contract." Despite himself, Marcus smiled slightly. He would say that. Clara reached out to take his hand, and Marcus noticed how thin her fingers had become, how prominent the veins were against her dark skin. "There are 2 kinds of people in this world," she said. "Those who let others define them, and those who define themselves. Your grandfather was the second kind. Your father is the second kind." Her eyes locked with his. "Which are you?" As the morning light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the room, Marcus felt something shifting inside him. The humiliation was still there, raw and painful. But beneath it, anchoring him like bedrock, was something older and stronger, the legacy of struggle and triumph that had defined his family for generations. "You know," Clara said softly, "when I was teaching, I had this student. Brilliant boy, but poor as dirt. Every day the rich kids would make fun of his clothes, his lunch, everything. One day he stopped coming to school." She paused, another brief flicker of pain crossing her face that she quickly masked. "I went to his house. Found him hiding under his bed. Know what I told him?" Marcus shook his head. "I said, you staying home doesn't make them better people. It just makes you an absent one." Clara's voice grew stronger. "That boy went on to become a surgeon. Saves lives every day." She squeezed Marcus's hand. "The world doesn't get better when good people hide, baby. It gets better when they show up and change it." The spark in Marcus grew brighter. His grandmother's words and the history she'd shared began to form a foundation under his feet where before there had been only shifting sand. "I don't know how to fight this," he admitted. "You start by standing up," Clara replied simply. "Everything else follows." As Marcus helped his grandmother put away the box of memories, he noticed her taking slow, measured breaths. There was something she wasn't telling him, but he also recognized the determined set of her jaw, the same expression his father got when his mind was made up. Whatever she was hiding, she wasn't ready to share it. But what she had shared today was giving Marcus the strength to consider facing tomorrow. The next morning, Marcus stood outside the gleaming entrance of Johnson Enterprises. His heart pounded, but his grandmother's words echoed in his mind, "The world doesn't get better when good people hide." Taking a deep breath, he walked through the revolving door and approached the security desk. The guard who had greeted him warmly just days before now looked uncomfortable. "Good morning, Marcus. I need to check something." The guard made a call, speaking in hushed tones. After hanging up, he avoided eye contact. "I'm sorry, but your access badge has been temporarily deactivated. Something about revised internship guidelines." Heat rushed to Marcus's face. "Can you call my father's office? Sarah can clear this up." "Sarah's out today," the guard said, still not meeting his eyes. "Maybe you should come back next week when your father returns." Marcus stood frozen, a second humiliation washing over him. Employees streamed past, some glancing curiously, others deliberately looking away. He recognized faces from the meeting room, people who had laughed at him. Just as he turned to leave, a gentle tap on his shoulder made him turn around. An older black man in a maintenance uniform stood there, his name tag reading, Thomas Washington. "Mr. Johnson," the man said quietly. "Could you help me with something in maintenance? Won't take but a minute." Confused but desperate to escape the lobby, Marcus followed Thomas down a service corridor to a small room filled with cleaning supplies and maintenance equipment. Once inside, Thomas closed the door and straightened up, his demeanor shifting from deferential to direct. "Your badge didn't just deactivate itself, son. Richard Whitman ordered it first thing this morning." "How do you know that?" Marcus asked. Thomas smiled slightly. "I've been here 30 years. Started when your daddy was working out of that tiny office on Monroe Street. The executives don't notice me much, but I notice everything." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. It showed two young men at what appeared to be a civil rights protest. Marcus recognized one immediately. "That's my grandfather," he said, stunned. Thomas nodded. "James Johnson. We marched together in '65. Best man I ever knew." His eyes grew distant with memory before refocusing. "I promised him I'd always look out for his family. And for 30 years, I've kept that promise." Marcus stared at Thomas, trying to process this connection to his family he'd never known existed. "Your father doesn't know half of what happens when he turns his back," Thomas continued, his voice dropping lower. "Richard Whitman isn't just a man with a chip on his shoulder. He's been systematically undermining Black and Latino executives for years. Redirecting their projects to fail, taking credit for their successes, blocking promotions. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Because he's never been this bold before. What he did to you in that meeting room. Thomas shook his head. That was a declaration of war. And now he's making his move while your father is overseas. What move? A corporate takeover. He's been building alliances on the board, manipulating financial reports, even planning to sell proprietary information to competitors. Thomas's eyes were deadly serious. I've been gathering evidence for years, waiting for the right moment. I think that moment is now. Marcus felt lightheaded. Why would you risk your job to help me? Thomas straightened proudly. Son, I'm 67 years old. I've seen too much injustice in my life to stand by and watch another good man get torn down by hate. He gestured to the photo. Besides, I made a promise. A soft knock interrupted them. Thomas opened the door cautiously to reveal a young Asian woman Marcus recognized from the IT department. Sophia Chen, she introduced herself quickly. I was at your presentation. Before Marcus could react, she added, I didn't laugh. What Richard did was wrong. Sophia's one of the good ones, Thomas explained. She's been helping me track some of Richard's activities. Sophia glanced nervously over her shoulder. Richard just promoted me to lead the new data analytics team. But last week I found irregularities in the financial reports he asked me to prepare. When I mentioned them, he told me to fix the numbers. She pulled out a keycard. Here. My access badge. It will get you into most areas. I have meetings all day, so no one will notice it's missing. Marcus stared at the badge, feeling the weight of the decision before him. If he took it, there was no turning back. He would be actively investigating his father's second-in-command. If caught, he could destroy his own reputation and potentially damage his father's company. Why risk your new promotion to help me? Marcus asked Sophia. Because my parents didn't come to this country and work themselves to the bone so I could be complicit in corruption and racism, she answered simply. And because Richard might have the board fooled, but some of us still believe in what your father built. Marcus looked from Thomas to Sophia, then at the badge in her outstretched hand. Something his grandmother had said yesterday came back to him, turn poison into medicine. With a deep breath, Marcus took the badge. What do we do first? He asked. Thomas and Sophia exchanged glances. We find proof, Thomas said. And we do it fast, before Richard realizes what we're up to. As Marcus clipped Sophia's badge to his jacket, he felt a strange mix of fear and determination. He was crossing a threshold from which there would be no easy return. But for the first time since his humiliation, he wasn't running away. He was running toward something, toward truth, toward justice, toward becoming the kind of man his family had raised him to be. That night, the Johnson Enterprises building stood mostly empty. Using Sophia's badge, Marcus, Thomas, and Sophia slipped into Richard's office suite. We have about 2 hours before the night security does their rounds, Thomas whispered, using his master key to unlock Richard's private office. Marcus hesitated at the threshold. Is this legal? We're not stealing anything, Sophia replied, already booting up Richard's computer. Just looking for evidence of crimes he's already committed. While Sophia worked on bypassing the password, Thomas guided Marcus to a filing cabinet. Richard keeps physical copies of certain documents. Old school. Thinks it's safer than digital. Marcus carefully sifted through folders, trying to make sense of the business documents. Meanwhile, Sophia let out a quiet cheer. I'm in. His password was Johnson 2 Fall. Charming. For the next hour, they combed through files. Marcus found a pattern in project reassignments. Executives of color consistently had their successful initiatives redirected or their teams reshuffled just before completion. "Look at this," Sophia called, pointing to her screen. "Emails between Richard and Excel Tech, our biggest competitor. He's offering to sell our new semiconductor designs." Marcus leaned in, reading the incriminating messages. "This is treason against the company. We need to tell my father immediately." Finding a quiet corner, Marcus placed an international call. Despite the time difference, Darius answered. "Marcus? It's the middle of the night there. What's wrong?" "Dad, I found something serious. Richard Whitman is planning to sell company secrets to Excel Tech, and he's been systematically undermining minority executives for years." A long pause followed. "That's a very serious accusation, son." "I have proof, Dad." "Emails, documents - Marcus," Darius interrupted, his voice strained, "I'm in the middle of a crisis here. The Singapore deal is falling apart, and I need all my focus. Richard has been my right hand for 15 years. I can't entertain conspiracy theories right now." "But Dad, after what he did to me in that meeting - I heard about the meeting," Darius said, his voice softening slightly. "We'll discuss it when I return. Richard can be harsh, but he's a valuable executive. Business isn't always nice, Marcus. Sometimes you need thick skin." Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You're not listening to me. This isn't about the meeting. He's planning to betray you." "Enough." Darius rarely raised his voice, and the sharp tone stunned Marcus into silence. "I don't have time for this. We'll talk when I get back." The call ended, leaving Marcus staring at his phone in disbelief. "He didn't believe me," he whispered, turning to Thomas. "And Sophia. My own father didn't believe me." Thomas placed a weathered hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Your father is under tremendous pressure. And he's trusted Richard for a long time. It's hard to accept betrayal from someone that close." Sophia continued downloading evidence. "We'll gather everything, present it all at once. He'll have to believe it then." As they prepared to leave, Sophia suddenly stopped, pointing to a document on the screen. "This is weird. Richard scheduled an emergency board meeting for the day before your father returns." "That can't be good," Thomas muttered. "We need to find out what he's planning," Marcus said, renewed determination filling his voice. "Let's try to access some of the board members. Maybe Janet Miller. She's been a family friend for years." Back home, Marcus found Clara still awake, watching late-night TV. "You're out late," she observed, studying his face. "Something happened." Marcus told her everything, the evidence they'd found, his father's dismissal, their plans to approach Janet. "Be careful with Janet," Clara warned. "People change, especially when power and money are involved." Marcus nodded absently, noticing how tired his grandmother looked. "Are you feeling okay, Grandma?" "Just a little tired." She pressed her hand to her chest, wincing slightly. "Nothing for you to worry about. Maybe you should see Dr. Wilson. You haven't had a checkup in a while." "I'm fine," she insisted, but her breathing seemed labored. "Just focus on what you need to do." As Marcus headed upstairs, his phone rang. It was Sophia. "Marcus, I dug deeper into those financial reports. Richard hasn't just been sabotaging executives, he's been siphoning funds into offshore accounts for years. Small amounts each time, but it adds up to millions. This is getting bigger than I expected," Marcus admitted. "I don't know if we can handle this ourselves. We don't have a choice. The board meeting is in 4 days, and I think that's when he's making his move." After hanging up, Marcus paced his room, feeling the weight of the situation crushing down on him. His father didn't believe him. He had limited time and resources. And somewhere in the building where he'd grown up visiting his father, a conspiracy was unfolding that could destroy everything the Johnson family had built. His phone buzzed with a text from Thomas, "Meet tomorrow, 7 a.m. Need to show you something in the archive room." Marcus collapsed onto his bed, exhausted but mind racing. The distance between yesterday's humiliation and today's discoveries seemed vast. He was no longer just a humiliated intern, he was the only person standing between his father's legacy and those who sought to destroy it. Have you ever felt that nobody believed you, even when you knew the truth? This is a moment to reflect on how we support those we love. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that make us think about family, integrity, and courage. The next morning, Marcus made his way to Janet Miller's office. As CFO and a close family friend who had attended his birthday parties since childhood, she seemed like the natural person to turn to. "Marcus." What a surprise, Janet greeted him warmly, rising from behind her desk to embrace him. "I heard about what happened at the meeting. Just terrible." "That's actually why I'm here," Marcus said, taking a seat. "There's something bigger going on, Janet. Something you need to know about." Janet's smile remained fixed, but her eyes grew cautious. "What do you mean?" Marcus carefully explained what they had discovered: the sabotage of minority executives, the financial irregularities, the planned sale of company secrets. He deliberately left out Thomas and Sophia's names to protect them. "That's quite a story," Janet said, her voice neutral. She walked to her office door and closed it. "You know, I've always had a soft spot for you, Marcus. Your father has been good to me. Then you'll help us." "Stop, Richard?" Marcus asked hopefully. Janet's smile faded. "Your father built this company at a fortunate time. Diversity initiatives, government contracts with minority-owned business requirements, he capitalized on the political climate." Marcus stared at her, confused by the sudden change in tone. "Don't misunderstand me," Janet continued, sitting on the edge of her desk. "Your father is brilliant. But so are others who didn't have his advantages." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. "What are you saying?" "Your father's time is ending. The company needs new leadership. Leadership that understands today's business landscape." Janet leaned forward. "You're smart, Marcus. Join us. We can guarantee you a place in the new structure." Marcus stood up slowly, disbelief washing over him. "You're part of this. You're working with Richard." "It's not personal," Janet replied coolly. "It's business. Your father taught me that." "My father taught you about loyalty and integrity too," Marcus shot back. "Or did you forget those lessons?" Janet sighed. "I was hoping you'd be reasonable. Richard thought you might be trouble, especially after that scene you caused at the meeting." "Scene I caused?" Marcus's voice rose in indignation. "You're young. Inexperienced. You misinterpreted constructive criticism." Janet picked up her phone. "This conversation is being recorded, by the way. I've been concerned about your erratic behavior since the meeting." Marcus realized too late that he'd walked into a trap. "You won't get away with this. When my father returns, your father will return to find evidence that you and he plan to remove long-standing executives in a nepotistic restructuring," Janet cut in sharply. "Richard discovered your secret plans. Very disappointing, especially from a company that prides itself on fairness and merit." Marcus backed toward the door. "Nobody will believe that. The board already does. Richard presented the initial evidence yesterday." Janet's smile returned, cold and calculating. "You should go home, Marcus. Stay there until your father returns. For your own good." Shaken to his core, Marcus left the building. He tried calling his father again, but it went straight to voicemail. The betrayal by Aunt Janet, who had given him birthday presents and attended his graduation, cut deeply. When he arrived home, he found his grandmother on the phone, her voice urgent. "Yes, I understand. No, I haven't told them yet. I wanted to be sure." She noticed Marcus and quickly ended the call. "You're home early." "Janet's involved," Marcus said flatly. "She's working with Richard. They're framing me and Dad, claiming we plan to fire executives." Clara didn't seem surprised. "The worst betrayals always come from those closest to us." "Who were you talking to just now?" Marcus asked. "Nobody important." Clara waved dismissively, but Marcus noticed her hands trembling. Before he could press further, she suddenly clutched her chest, her face contorting in pain. "Grandma!" Marcus rushed to her side as she collapsed onto the sofa, struggling to breathe. "I'm calling an ambulance." "No," she protested weakly, but Marcus was already dialing. The next few hours passed in a blur of paramedics, hospital corridors, and harsh fluorescent lights. Finally, a doctor approached Marcus in the waiting room. "Your grandmother has a serious heart condition," the doctor explained. "Has she been taking her medication?" I didn't know she was on medication," Marcus admitted. The doctor frowned. According to her records, she was diagnosed 3 months ago. The condition requires careful management. She should have been taking daily medication and coming in for regular monitoring. Marcus felt like the floor was dropping out from under him. "She never told us." "Well, she's stabilized for now. We'll keep her overnight for observation." When Marcus was finally allowed to see Clara, he found her looking small and fragile against the white hospital sheets, an oxygen tube in her nose. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, fighting back tears. "You and your father had enough to worry about," she replied weakly. "I was handling it." "Clearly not," Marcus said, more sharply than he intended. Clara reached for his hand. "There's something in my bedroom closet. A steel box on the top shelf. The combination is your birthday. Get it and look inside. It might help you with your current situation." Marcus wanted to argue, to insist that she focus on her health, not his problems with the company. But the determined look in her eyes stopped him. "Promise me you'll take care of yourself," he said instead. "I've been taking care of myself for 75 years, she replied with a ghost of her usual spirit. "I'm not stopping now." As Marcus left the hospital, his phone rang. It was Sophia, her voice tense. "Richard is telling everyone you tried to access confidential files. Security is looking for you. And Marcus. Richard knows someone helped you. He's questioning everyone in IT." Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. His father didn't believe him. Janet had betrayed him. His grandmother was in the hospital. And now Sophia's job was in danger because of him. Everything was falling apart, and he seemed powerless to stop it. After leaving the hospital, Marcus went straight to his grandmother's room. The steel box was exactly where she'd said, hidden behind old photo albums. Using his birthday as the combination, he opened it to find a stack of yellowed documents. At first glance, they looked like ordinary financial records from the early days of Johnson Enterprises. But as Marcus examined them more closely, he realized what he was holding, evidence that Richard had been falsifying documents since the company's beginning. Among the papers was a handwritten note from Clara, "I was your father's first secretary before I went back to teaching. I kept these because something felt wrong about the way Richard changed the numbers. Trust your instincts, just like I did." Marcus stared at the papers in disbelief. His grandmother had suspected Richard for over 20 years but had kept silent, protecting these documents just in case they were ever needed. His phone rang. It was Thomas. "Where are you?" the older man asked, his voice urgent. "Richard's security team searched my locker today. I'm at home. My grandmother's in the hospital, heart condition." "I'm sorry to hear that," Thomas said sincerely. "But you need to know Richard's moved up the board meeting to tomorrow morning. He's not waiting for your father to return." "What? That only gives us a few hours." Marcus clutched the papers tighter. I found something old financial documents showing Richard has been falsifying records for decades. That might help, but we need more, Thomas replied. We need current evidence that directly ties Richard to the offshore accounts and the technology sale. Sophia might have that. Have you heard from her? Thomas's voice lowered. That's the other reason I'm calling. I saw Sophia go into Richard's office an hour ago. She came out with a flash drive that she gave to him. I think she might have switched sides. The betrayal hit Marcus like a physical blow. Are you sure? Maybe she was just trying to dash. She's been promoted to Director of Data Security, effective immediately, Thomas cut in. It was announced by email right after her meeting with Richard. Marcus sank onto his grandmother's bed, the room spinning around him. First his father's dismissal, then Janet's betrayal, now Sophia. Was there anyone he could trust? What do we do now? He asked, hating how defeated his voice sounded. I still have access to the security camera feeds, Thomas said after a moment. If you can get back into the building tonight, maybe we can find something on Richard's computer directly. That's too risky. Richard knows someone helped me before. He'll be watching. Then we're out of options. Thomas sounded as defeated as Marcus felt. Unless what? Unless your father changes his plans and comes home early. Marcus straightened up. I'll call him again. Make him listen this time. But Darius's phone still went straight to voicemail. Marcus left a desperate message explaining everything: Clara's hospitalization, Janet's betrayal, the emergency board meeting. When he hung up, he felt completely alone. He spread his grandmother's documents across her bed, searching for anything that might help. As he sorted through them, a hospital bill slipped out from between the pages. It was dated 2 months ago, with "second notice" stamped across it in red. Clara had been dealing with this alone, hiding her condition while still trying to guide him through his own crisis. Shame washed over Marcus at how absorbed he'd been in his own problems. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number: "Meet me in the hospital parking garage. Level 3. Alone. Sophia." But could he trust her? After what Thomas had told him, it could easily be a trap. Taking his grandmother's documents and the hospital bill, Marcus drove back to the hospital. As he approached the parking garage, caution made him park a block away and enter on foot, staying in the shadows. On level 3, a lone figure waited beside a concrete pillar. Sophia looked nervously around, clutching her laptop bag. "Are you alone?" she asked when she spotted him. "Why should I trust you?" Marcus countered, keeping his distance. "Thomas saw you giving Richard a flash drive. He told me about your promotion." To his surprise, Sophia smiled. "Good. That means Richard trusts me too." She opened her laptop. "I didn't betray you, Marcus. I played Richard. The flash drive I gave him contained exactly what he wanted: doctored logs showing you accessing confidential files. But it also contained a tracking program that records everything he does on his computer." She turned the screen toward Marcus, showing a real-time view of Richard's email account. "He thinks he won. That's exactly what we want him to think." Relief flooded through Marcus. "So you've been collecting evidence all day?" "Better than that," Sophia replied, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "I've captured evidence of him contacting the board members individually, promising each of them special considerations in exchange for their support tomorrow. And I have the final confirmation of his deal with Exceltech. He's selling them your father's semiconductor designs for $10 million, to be deposited in his Cayman Islands account." Marcus stared at the screen, hope beginning to rise again. This is exactly what we need. But will it be enough? The meeting is tomorrow, and my father's still not answering his phone. "There's one more thing," Sophia said, lowering her voice. "I don't think your father's phone is working. The last cell tower ping from his number was 36 hours ago. It's like he's gone completely off the grid. A cold feeling settled in Marcus's stomach. Had Richard somehow gotten to his father? Was Darius in danger? What do we do now? He asked. We confront Richard directly, Sophia said firmly. Tonight, when the building's empty. We record everything. And then we send it to every board member before tomorrow's meeting. It was desperate. It was dangerous. But looking at his grandmother's hospital bill and the documents she'd protected for decades, Marcus knew he had no choice. Okay, he agreed. Let's end this. Tonight. The Johnson Enterprises building stood silent in the night, its windows dark except for security lighting. Marcus and Sophia sat in her car across the street, watching as the last few employees left the parking garage. Thomas disabled the camera on the service entrance, Sophia said, checking her phone. We have a 15-minute window before the security system auto-resets. Marcus nodded, trying to calm his racing heart. In his pocket were his grandmother's documents. On Sophia's laptop was the evidence they'd gathered against Richard. It had to be enough. Ready? Sophia asked. No, Marcus admitted. But let's do it anyway. They slipped into the building through the service entrance where Thomas was waiting. The old janitor looked worried. Richard's still here, he whispered. 15th floor, his office. Been on the phone for hours. Perfect, Sophia replied. That's where we need to be anyway. Thomas handed them each a maintenance badge. These will get you access to the service elevator. I'll monitor the security desk from the cameras. If anyone comes, I'll send you a warning. As they prepared to part ways, Thomas pulled Marcus aside. Your grandfather would be proud, he said quietly. No matter what happens tonight, remember that. The service elevator creaked as it carried them upward. Marcus found himself thinking about his father, somewhere on the other side of the world, unreachable when he was needed most. What if my father really is in danger? Marcus asked suddenly. One crisis at a time, Sophia advised. We stop Richard tonight. Then we find your father. The elevator stopped at the 14th floor. They'd have to take the stairs the rest of the way to avoid being seen. As they crept through the darkened office floor, Marcus's phone vibrated. It was a text from the hospital, patient Clara Johnson showing improved vital signs. Requesting family visit tomorrow morning. Relief washed over him. At least his grandmother was stable. At the stairwell door, Sophia paused. Once we confront Richard, there's no going back. You understand that, right? If we fail, your reputation, my job, Thomas's retirement, they're all gone. And if we do nothing, my father loses everything he built, Marcus replied. I'm ready. They climbed the stairs silently, emerging into the executive floor where Richard's office light still burned. Through the glass walls, they could see him pacing, phone to his ear, gesturing emphatically. We need to record everything, Sophia whispered, setting up her phone in an inconspicuous spot outside the office. Get him to admit to the conspiracy, the offshore accounts, and the technology sale. What if he doesn't? Make him angry, Sophia suggested. People reveal their true selves when they're angry. Marcus took a deep breath, thinking of his grandmother in the hospital bed, of his father who might be in danger, of Thomas who had kept a promise for 30 years. Let's do this. They waited until Richard ended his call, then Marcus knocked on the glass door. Richard looked up, surprise quickly turning to a smirk. Marcus Johnson. I thought you'd be home crying to Daddy. Oh wait, Daddy's not answering your calls, is he? We need to talk, Richard, Marcus said, entering the office with Sophia behind him. Richard's eyes narrowed at Sophia. Ms. Chen. Interesting company you're keeping after our agreement this morning. I was never on your side, Sophia stated flatly. Richard laughed. Of course you were. Everyone has their price. Yours was just a promotion. He turned his attention back to Marcus. What do you want? To beg for your internship back? Or maybe for me not to press charges for unauthorized access of company files? I want you to stop, Marcus said simply. Stop the conspiracy against my father. Stop the sale to Exceltech. Stop the offshore accounts. Richard's face hardened. You have no idea what you're talking about. We have evidence, Sophia interjected, opening her laptop. Every email, every transfer, every contact with the board members. We know everything. For a moment, Richard looked unsettled, but then his confident smile returned. Evidence gathered illegally won't hold up. And by tomorrow morning, it won't matter anyway. The board will vote to remove your father as CEO. With me as his replacement. It's already decided. Why? Marcus demanded, feeling his control slipping. My father trusted you. For 15 years, he treated you like a brother. Because he got everything I deserved. Richard suddenly shouted, his calm facade cracking. I worked twice as hard my entire career. But your father, he played the diversity card at exactly the right time. Minority-owned business initiatives, diversity grants, special consideration for government contracts. He rode that wave while better qualified people like me watched from the sidelines. The naked prejudice in Richard's voice stunned Marcus. Is that what you really think? That my father's success is because of his race? Not because of his vision, his work ethic, his integrity? Please, Richard scoffed. The world was bending over backward to promote black entrepreneurs when your father started this company. Right place, right time, right skin color. Marcus thought of all the stories his grandmother had told him, of the 17 loan rejections, of the humiliation his father had endured. You're wrong. And I won't let you destroy what he built. You can't stop it, Richard said, his voice dropping to a dangerous tone. By this time tomorrow, Johnson Enterprises will be mine. Your father will return to find himself ousted, his reputation in tatters, and his precious legacy destroyed. And what about the technology sale to Exceltech? Sophia pressed. Selling company secrets isn't just unethical, it's illegal. Richard shrugged. Business is business. $10 million buys a lot of new beginnings. You'll go to prison, Marcus warned. Only if someone can prove it. Richard's eyes gleamed with malice. And who's going to believe you, Marcus? The spoiled heir who couldn't handle a little criticism? Or me, the loyal executive who uncovered your father's nepotistic plans? Marcus felt his hands trembling with rage, but he forced himself to stay calm. I believe in the truth, Richard. And so will the board, once they see the evidence. Richard laughed again, but this time there was a nervous edge to it. You're smarter than I thought, Marcus. But you're still too late. The pieces are already in motion. He glanced at his watch. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an early meeting tomorrow. A very important meeting. As Richard moved to leave, Marcus blocked his path. This isn't over. Oh, it's over, Richard replied coldly. You just don't know it yet. The tension between them was palpable, two men standing at the precipice of a battle that would determine the fate of everything the Johnson family had built. You think you've won because you have some emails and financial records? Richard's voice was calm again, the momentary crack in his composure sealed over. By tomorrow morning, none of it will matter. Why wait until tomorrow? A new voice entered the conversation. All three of them turned toward the door. Darius Johnson stood in the entrance, his face haggard from travel but his eyes sharp and clear. Dad! Marcus exclaimed. How did you dash? I got your messages, Darius said, not taking his eyes off Richard. All of them. I changed my flight as soon as I heard about your grandmother. Richard's face had gone pale. Darius. You're supposed to be in Singapore until tomorrow night. Clearly, Darius replied coldly. He nodded to someone in the hallway, and 3 members of the board entered the office behind him, followed by Thomas. Richard's told them all sorts of lies about us, Marcus quickly explained. He's been planning to take over the company. I know, son, Darius said calmly. Thomas reached out to me directly after you left him those voicemails. He found a way to contact me when my regular phone wasn't working. Thomas nodded. Your father and I have been coordinating since early this morning. Understanding dawned on Marcus. That's why he seemed to disappear. I needed Richard to think his plan was working, Darius explained. I needed to see how far he would go, and who was with him. He turned to the board members. Are you convinced now? The chairwoman, Barbara Chen, nodded grimly. We've heard enough. Richard has been quite explicit about his views and plans. Richard's eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal's. What are you talking about? This is absurd. I've done nothing wrong. Sophia stepped forward with her laptop. Actually, Richard, that little conversation we just had. It was being live-streamed to the board members. All of them. They heard everything, including your admission about selling company secrets to Excel Tech and your real feelings about diversity hires. For the first time, genuine fear flickered across Richard's face. You can't prove anything. It's my word against yours. It's your word against yourself, Darius corrected him. And against the evidence Sophia has collected, the documents my mother preserved, and the testimony of a dozen employees who've experienced your discrimination firsthand. This is a setup. Richard shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. They hacked my computer, accessed files illegally. Save it for your lawyer, Barbara Chen cut in. The board has heard enough to make an immediate decision regarding your employment. Richard's face contorted with rage. He lunged toward Marcus suddenly. This is your fault. You entitled little. Security guards appeared at the door, restraining Richard before he could reach Marcus. Get him out of my building, Darius ordered. As the guards led a struggling Richard away, he shouted back, you think you've won? You're nothing without your daddy's name. Nothing. When Richard was gone, the room fell silent. Marcus looked at his father, suddenly unsure what to say after everything that had happened. Darius broke the silence first. I owe you an apology, son. I should have listened to you from the beginning. You had a lot going on, Marcus replied, feeling the tension of the past days beginning to release. How's the Singapore deal? Lost it, Darius said with a shrug. Turns out some things are more important than business deals. Like family. Speaking of which, how's your grandmother? Stable. We can see her in the morning. Darius nodded, then turned to the board members. We have a lot to discuss, but it can wait until a proper meeting. For now, I think we've all had enough excitement. After the board members left, Darius pulled Thomas into a tight embrace. Thank you for keeping your promise to my father. All these years. Thomas's weathered face crinkled into a smile. James was my best friend. Looking out for his family has been an honor. Darius turned to Sophia. And you risked everything, your new position, your career, to help my son expose the truth. Sophia shrugged. My parents didn't raise me to choose advancement over integrity. The company needs people like you, Darius said. How would you feel about a real promotion? Director of Corporate Ethics and Compliance. We clearly need one. As Sophia stammered her thanks, Marcus felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The adrenaline that had kept him going was fading, leaving him drained. Darius seemed to notice. He put an arm around his son's shoulders. Come on. Let's go home. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day. As they left the building, Marcus couldn't help looking back at his father's office, the office Richard had coveted for so long. What happens now? With the company, I mean. Now. Darius sighed heavily. Now we clean house. Richard wasn't working alone. Janet Miller, at least 3 vice presidents, several board members, they were all part of it. All those people? Marcus asked, stunned by the scope of the betrayal. Darius nodded grimly. Sometimes rot spreads far before you see it on the surface. In the parking lot, Darius stopped and turned to face his son directly. Marcus, what you did these past few days, standing up when it would have been easier to walk away, pursuing the truth when no one believed you, even putting yourself at risk. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. I couldn't be prouder of the man you're becoming. Under the glow of the parking lot lights, father and son embraced. The crisis wasn't fully resolved, and tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for the first time since his humiliation in the conference room, Marcus felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. The ordeal had changed him. He was no longer just Darius Johnson's son, living in the shadow of his father's legacy. He had faced betrayal, disbelief, and danger, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than before. As they drove home through the quiet Chicago streets, Marcus thought about his grandmother's words: turn poison into medicine. The poison of Richard's hatred and prejudice had nearly destroyed his father's company. But in its place, something stronger could now grow. The next morning, the Johnson Enterprises lobby buzzed with activity. Security guards escorted executives and board members out of the building, some protesting loudly, others leaving in silent shame. Employees gathered in clusters, whispering and watching as the company they knew transformed before their eyes. Marcus stood beside his father as Darius addressed the gathered press outside the building. Today marks a new chapter for Johnson Enterprises, Darius announced, his voice strong and clear. After uncovering evidence of widespread corruption, discrimination, and corporate espionage within our leadership team, I have made the decision to remove all executives and board members who were complicit either through direct action or through their silence. Cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions. Is it true that over 70% of upper management has been terminated? One called out. Yes, Darius confirmed. This is not a decision I made lightly. But when faced with evidence of systematic discrimination against employees of color, financial fraud, and an attempted corporate takeover, there was no other choice. What about the allegations that your son was the target of racial harassment? Another reporter asked. Darius glanced at Marcus before answering. What happened to my son was unacceptable. But it was just one symptom of a deeper problem. This isn't just about defending my family. It's about upholding the values this company was built on: integrity, innovation, and equal opportunity for all. As the press conference continued, Marcus slipped away. He had somewhere more important to be. At the hospital, Clara was sitting up in bed, looking at the television where Darius's press conference was being broadcast. About time, she said when Marcus entered. Your father should have cleaned house years ago. How are you feeling? Marcus asked, kissing her cheek. Better than the doctors expected, Clara replied with a hint of pride. They say I can go home tomorrow if I promise to take it easy and take my medication. Which I will, she added before Marcus could lecture her. You should have told us about your condition, Marcus said gently. Clara waved a dismissive hand. And what would you have done? Worried? Hovered? I've been taking care of myself for decades. And now we're going to help, Marcus insisted. That's what family does. Clara studied him for a moment. You've changed this week. Had to, Marcus replied simply. A knock at the door interrupted them. Thomas entered, carrying a small bouquet of flowers. Miss Clara, he greeted her with a warm smile. You're looking better already. Clara's face lit up with recognition. Thomas Washington. I haven't seen you since Darius's wedding. Still keeping an eye on my boys? Always, Thomas replied, placing the flowers beside her bed. Though your grandson did a fine job looking out for himself and the company. As they caught up, Marcus's phone buzzed. With a text from his father, meeting in 30 minutes. Big decisions ahead. Need you there. At Johnson Enterprises, the executive floor had a subdued atmosphere. The boardroom, once filled with people who had laughed at Marcus's humiliation, now sat half-empty. Darius had called an emergency meeting with the remaining board members and key employees. "We need to rebuild our leadership team," Darius explained once everyone was seated. "And we need to do it with people who share our values." He announced a series of immediate appointments: Thomas Washington as the new Director of Corporate Security, overseeing a team that would ensure the company's physical and digital safety. Sophia Chen as Director of Ethics and Compliance, with authority to implement new anti-discrimination policies and financial oversight procedures. Then Darius turned to Marcus. "And I'd like to announce the creation of a new initiative, the Johnson Future Leaders Program. This mentorship program will identify talented young people from underserved communities and provide them with education, training, and career opportunities within our company." Marcus looked up in surprise as his father continued. "This program will be led by Marcus Johnson, who has demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership qualities we want to foster: integrity, courage, and a commitment to justice." The room erupted in applause. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the sudden shift from humiliated intern to program director. "I haven't even started college yet," he whispered to his father. "You'll balance both," Darius replied confidently. "After what you accomplished this week, I think you can handle it." That evening, Clara was surprised by visitors at the hospital, dozens of her former students, now adults with careers and families of their own. They filled her room with flowers and cards, sharing stories about the impact she'd had on their lives. "We heard what happened at Johnson Enterprises," one former student explained to Marcus. "And when we found out Clara was in the hospital, we wanted her to know how many lives she's touched." Another stepped forward. "Many of us have signed up to volunteer with your new mentorship program. We want to give back, just like your grandmother did for us." Clara, overwhelmed by the show of support, tried to hide the tears in her eyes. "I always told you all that education was your weapon and your shield," she said to her former students. "I'm so proud to see how you've used it." Later, as the visitors began to leave, Marcus sat beside his grandmother's bed. "Your program is a wonderful idea," Clara said. "A way to create something positive from all this ugliness." "It wasn't my idea," Marcus admitted. "Dad surprised me with it." "But you'll make it work," Clara stated with confidence. "You've got that Johnson stubbornness." As Marcus drove home that night, he reflected on the extraordinary week that had changed everything. From public humiliation to corporate conspiracy to family crisis, he had faced it all and emerged not just intact, but stronger. His phone rang. It was Sophia. "Have you seen the news?" she asked excitedly. "Johnson Enterprises stock is up 12%. The market is responding positively to the leadership changes." "That's great," Marcus replied. "But honestly, I'm more excited about the mentorship program." "Me too," Sophia agreed. "By the way, I've been going through Richard's old files. The pattern of discrimination goes back years. Dozens of qualified employees of color were blocked from advancement. Then our first job is to find them and make things right," Marcus said decisively. As the city lights streaked past his car window, Marcus felt a new sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he was walking his own path, not just following in his father's footsteps. "Thank you for following this journey of courage and transformation. Your support allows us to continue telling stories that inspire and move us all." What moment from this story touched your heart the most? Leave a comment, give us a like, and share this with someone who needs inspiration today. 6 months passed. The cool Chicago spring had given way to summer, then early fall. Johnson Enterprises had undergone a transformation both inside and out, not just new leadership, but a new culture. The company stood gleaming in the morning sunlight as Marcus walked through the front entrance, employees greeting him by name. No longer the awkward intern, he moved with confidence born of hard experience. At 20, with his first year of college underway, he balanced his studies with his role directing the Johnson Future Leaders program. Today was special. The company was receiving the National Business Ethics Award, recognizing its dramatic turnaround and commitment to diversity and inclusion. More importantly to Marcus, it was the official dedication of the newly renovated main conference room, now named the Clara Johnson Hall. "Nervous about your speech?" Sophia asked, falling into step beside him. Her new position as Director of Ethics and Compliance had already made waves in the business community. "A little," Marcus admitted. "But nothing like the last time I presented in that room." Sophia smiled. "That feels like a lifetime ago." In many ways, it was. Richard was awaiting trial for corporate espionage and fraud. Janet and several former executives had reached settlements in exchange for cooperation. The company had emerged stronger, more transparent, and more committed to its founding values than ever before. As Marcus reached his office, Thomas was waiting with a security update. At 67, he had initially resisted the promotion to Director of Corporate Security, insisting he was too old. But Darius had been adamant, and Thomas's wisdom and integrity had proven invaluable during the transition. "The first cohort of students arrives next week," Thomas reminded him. 25 young people from across Chicago. Security clearances are all processed. Marcus nodded gratefully. The mentorship program was accepting promising students from underserved communities, offering education stipends, career training, and guaranteed job interviews upon completion. Many of Clara's former students had signed on as mentors. At noon, employees and special guests gathered in the newly renovated conference room. The space where Marcus had once faced humiliation had been transformed bright, open, and welcoming. Photos of Clara in her teaching days adorned one wall, along with her favorite quote, "Education is both weapon and shield." Darius opened the ceremony with remarks about the company's journey. When he introduced Marcus, the room erupted in genuine applause so different from the mocking laughter 6 months ago. Marcus took the podium, looking out at faces both familiar and new. In the front row sat Clara in a wheelchair, friendlier than before but with eyes as sharp as ever. Her heart condition required ongoing care, but her spirit remained undiminished. 6 months ago, I stood in this room to present ideas about digital innovation, Marcus began. I never got to finish that presentation. Today, I'd like to pick up where I left off, but with a deeper understanding of what innovation really means. With calm confidence, Marcus outlined not just digital strategies, but a vision for how technology could serve human needs and advance equality. As he spoke, he could feel his grandmother's proud gaze. Innovation isn't just about new technology, he concluded. It's about creating systems where everyone can contribute their unique talents without fear or prejudice. It's about recognizing that diversity isn't just a buzzword, it's our greatest competitive advantage. When he finished, the applause was immediate and heartfelt. Darius joined him at the podium, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to officially dedicate the Clara Johnson Hall, named for the woman who taught generations of students and her own family about courage, integrity, and the power of education." Clara, assisted by a nurse, slowly rose from her wheelchair. Though her body had weakened, her dignity and determination remained undiminished as she acknowledged the standing ovation with a gracious nod. After the ceremony, as guests mingled, Clara beckoned Marcus to her side. "You finished your presentation," she said with satisfaction. "Full circle." "Thanks to you," Marcus replied, kneeling beside her chair. "If you hadn't kept those documents, if you hadn't pushed me to go back." Clara patted his hand. "You would have found your way. Johnson's stubbornness, remember?" Across the room, Marcus spotted 2 young people speaking with Darius Thomas's son and daughter, both part of the first mentorship cohort. "Look at that," Clara said, following his gaze. "The future, right there." At that moment, Marcus truly understood what his journey had been about. Not just saving his father's company or standing up to prejudice, but building a bridge from one generation to the next, from those who had fought for equality decades ago to those who would carry the work forward. Later, as the event wound down, Marcus stood at the window overlooking Chicago. Darius joined him, both men reflecting on all that had happened. "You know," Darius said quietly, "when I started this company, I thought success meant proving wrong everyone who said a black man couldn't build something lasting. But now I see success differently." "How so?" Marcus asked. "Success is what happens after you're gone," Darius replied, nodding toward the young people gathering for a tour of the facility. "It's what continues without you. What you're building with this program, that's real success." As evening fell, Marcus helped his grandmother into the car for the drive home. In the fading light, the Johnson Enterprises building stood as a testament to resilience, to integrity, to the power of standing up when it would be easier to stay down. "The true legacy I carry isn't the company name on my badge," Marcus reflected, thinking of his journey from humiliated intern to program director. "It's the courage of all who came before me, who refused to accept no as an answer. And as long as I'm here, no one will have to face alone what I faced." As the car pulled away, Marcus knew that while one journey had ended, another was just beginning. The poison had indeed become medicine, not just for him, but for all those who would follow in his footsteps.